Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast, where today we'll be talking about state pay transparency and the evolving changes that we're seeing there. I'm Neil Dickinson. I manage our compensation services at OutSolve, and co-presenting with me today is Desiree Throckmorton. Desiree, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Desiree Throckmorton, Senior Consultant at OutSolve. Been in HR compliance for over 20 years and have had a passion for pay transparency, pay equity, probably since I was a kid and thought that everything should be fair.
Today, Desiree and I are diving into one of the biggest workplace shifts that's happening right now, and that is state pay transparency compliance. Secrecy around pay is disappearing very fast. What started as a trend in a few states is now a nationwide movement. PayScale recently reported that 60% of job postings contain expected job ranges. So if you're not posting pay ranges now, you're officially in the minority. So it's a great time to catch up if you're not doing it. And if you are, we'll be talking about best practices, the latest updates on state pay transparency laws, who's next and what's changing, best practices for compliance, how to set those pay ranges in your postings, and then the benefits and ramifications of pay transparency, of which there are some of both. But let's set the table, Desiree, with kind of the big picture on what's happening with pay transparency right now.
Well, I mean, we know that at the federal level, there isn't likely much to be expected for legislation around compliance with pay equity. I would imagine that's not going to be at the forefront of this current administration. So like Neil mentioned, it's going to likely be handled at the state level. And we know there were some changes in 2025 that are taking effect for different states, such as Massachusetts has a reporting that's required that actually closed last month in February, where employers had to upload their EO1 information for the locations or establishments in Massachusetts. So that was, one of the changes for 2025. But, the other changes are states that are, just to what Neil was saying, require us or require employers to post those pay ranges. So there's more states, requiring this. And the challenge that I see for employers is the varying thresholds for when you do and don't have to comply with that. So, Illinois says 15 employees, Minnesota 30 employees. There's just a lot of variance there. So I think that's a big challenge for employers to keep up with that moving target. And then, Neil, do you want to talk about some of the states we weren't expecting to see?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go ahead and share a graphic with you that kind of gives the view of what's happening from a legal standpoint right now, from a law standpoint in the states that have passed transparency laws. So you can see here the states that we've listed that are already doing it. Looks like there's about 9. And the ones that I'm listing here are states that are requiring state job posts, requiring salary ranges in the postings. There's a few other states, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Nevada, that require you to provide salary information on request, but they don't necessarily provide it on the front end with those postings. So these are the ones that many organizations are thinking about in terms of if you're doing business in these states, you have to have salary ranges in your postings. 3 more coming online here in the next year for New Jersey, Vermont, and Massachusetts. And then kind of like Desiree was mentioning, a lot more that have been proposed. Some of them in some surprising states, Florida, Iowa, West Virginia. Don't know if they'll pass or not, but it certainly shows the trend line, which is moving towards a universal approach to pay transparency, putting those ranges on pay ranges on the postings, and many more organizations are looking to find a universal, especially if you're hiring in multiple states, a universal solution to come into compliance. Maybe let's take a second, Desiree, and talk about what's the driver behind transparency and why states want us to do this. What do you see as what are we gaining by doing this?
Yeah, I think that's a great point to even think about when you're making all these efforts as an employer to be sure that your pay ranges are posted is, the purpose of pay transparency is it's an effort towards achieving pay equity, right? It's one of those steps that we need in order to close those wage gaps that I'm sure everybody on this call or listening to this is aware of. There's definitely movements in place that are beyond these state legislations. There's a TikToker I came across, and her name is Hannah Williams, and she has a company called Salary Transparent Street. It's kind of hard to say, but it's very interesting. She goes around to different cities and talks to people on the street and just asks them what they pay, what's their job, and what do they make. And she's talked to over 10,000 people. And in her effort of just engaging with people, she's also educating them on, pay transparency and pay equity laws and things that, they have in place to protect them that they often had no idea about. So this movement of the younger generation having these open conversations about pay, I think is kind of a movement towards, pay transparency in and of itself. It's kind of like the Me Too movement, the society kind of asking for these changes, for these visibility into what someone should be able to earn compared to their cohort in the same role. Is there pay equity? If you don't know what anyone's making and what the range is, how would you ever know? So I think it's just a matter of having that information up front. So I just think it's interesting. This younger generation is, using social media to kind of garner awareness, and that's what the younger generation uses for information. So I know even my own kids have, blatantly asked me, how much money do you make, Mom? And they want to just talk about it, and it's interesting because they didn't live in the world where you just don't talk about it.
Yeah, my kids were asking for my W-2s a couple of weeks ago to see what's happening, and so it's definitely changed a lot. And I agree with you. It was something that we never had no idea what my parents made growing up, and it really is a change. And that change is coming through in the expectations of applicants that they're expecting to see that as well. So as we talked about, there's a compliance obligation here in many states, but there's also now going to be a competitive reason to do it as well. If you're in that minority of not posting ranges, the question might be, well, why isn't this organization showing me what I can expect to make? So yes, fully agree. The driver is to close historical pay gaps, and we have actually seen lots of evidence that this really does work. Pay transparency works for encouraging fair pay. You're gonna have to do it right and be prepared for it, and you're gonna have to go through the efforts of, as more pay transparency, some of the ramifications of that are we're going to have to make sure that we're in market alignment, so that when we're doing our external postings that we know that we've got our benchmarking down, and know for these positions in the areas that we're posting, this is a competitive pay. And then just as importantly is internal alignment, knowing that obviously our current employees are going to be looking at those ranges for the jobs that they do and expecting that they're falling within that range based on the skills and experience that they have. Have you heard of other examples of that importance of internal equity from organizations that we've worked with, Desiree?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely a selling point for organizations that are making this a priority and communicating about it. I do think along the lines of, posting your ranges, the change of even not looking at salary history as a factor for, providing a job offer, determining a job offer for someone. I think it's important to sever that tie back to what were you making before. Because if you were, grossly underpaid, then you're going to continue to be grossly underpaid. And how does that even relative to your organization and how you value, the work of certain folks? And so, just like you were saying, the importance of determining, the benchmarking, both looking externally at pay within the external market for your kinds of jobs and your kind of industry, but also looking internally at what are folks making and make sure there's alignment there. So it's not something that you do once and walk away from. It's something that you have to continually do, as we know the composition of a workforce changes as people enter and exit the workforce. And so those internal comparisons obviously will change, and then just changes in the economy will influence that external market.
Yep, absolutely. In terms of best practices for what we're hearing, again, many organizations are trying to do is try to find a universal approach where we can come into compliance for all of the states that require transparency in postings. One important aspect here is that when we talk about a range, we're talking about a range for starting pay. So it's not necessarily the range for the full life cycle of that job at your organization. It is the range for starting pay. So that kind of gives you that limiter at the beginning. That's what we're talking about. So most organizations are looking to figure out what they would expect to pay, and then adding in a buffer, maybe a 7% low and 7% high, so that you still have that wiggle room and aren't, necessarily limiting hiring managers with what they could do. And we've really found that approach is, from a compliance standpoint, it really is that you're making a reasonable assessment. So it's not like someone's watching every time if you're going over by $2,000 or not always within that range. It really is the company are trying to make a reasonable effort to come into compliance and give good guidance on what someone can expect to make at the organization as a general best practice. Some of the other things that we're seeing is, so the requirements are that you post pay ranges for the job, but it doesn't mean you have to stop there. You can provide other good context, such as, this is the pay range based on your skills and experience. So if you expect that skills and experience are going to be the driver, if there's some sort of a matrix for setting that pay, you can let those applicants know that as well. That is additional transparency. This is going to help the applicant understand where they might fall within that range. It's going to help your employees, give them context for why someone may be falling where they are. So we definitely recommend that as well. You don't necessarily have to stop just at a range and kind of leave it there. You can give that additional context to where and why someone should fall within that range. Remote employees come up a lot as well. So if you're hiring nationwide, how do you handle that? Any thoughts on that one in terms of what we've been working with clients on, Desiree? It can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That creates a lot of complexity. If people can work anywhere, that widens the scope. What state are they going to be in? And then that determines, what is your compliance. So it's almost like, is it the chicken or the egg that decides what you have to comply with? So I think, like you said earlier, a lot of employers are taking more of a blanket approach of, putting those pay ranges in the postings because it's too hard to know, turn it off here, turn it on there. And it just makes it a lot easier to have that information. And it also probably creates a lot more efficiency in your recruitment process. Because if you find out someone applies for a job, they get the offer and it's much lower than they expect to receive. And now you've got to go back to the other candidates that you're interested in. It's a waste of time to not just post that up front. So I think there is a lot of reason for it, beyond just the goodness of what you and me care about in terms of pay equity and pay transparency, but also just efficiency within your system. I think there is a lot of value there.
Yeah, and the other one that I've here comes up a lot in terms of how we manage these postings is, how do you account for geographic differentials? So if you're hiring in places where you're going to have to pay more in certain markets, how do you incorporate that? And I think you're able to do that, whether it's just adding those geographic differentials to the top and bottom line of the range. That's a reasonable approach. Or in terms of transparency, I've seen organizations who've actually outlined as part of the posting that, depending on where you are, where we hire you from, there may be a premium assigned to pay. So again, the opportunity is there to provide as much context and as much transparency as you want around the salary ranges that you're providing. And I think that trend is going to continue to grow. Transparency, fair pay. I see it as something that is going to become front and center as we move into this year and the next few years, really because it plays on a lot of the things that we're already talking about. Fair pay is built on merit-based decisions, and that's what we all consider to be fair. And the more visibility that we have to that, and the more structures that we put in place around pay, are going to allow for more productive employees, better retention rates, better hire rates, all those things that go into good business are going to be associated with it as well. So really, I really see it as, yes, it's compliance. Yes, it's going to continue to change, but I also see it as a really great opportunity to embrace it.
One challenge with the pay transparency balancing is making sure you're doing the work to determine what those ranges should be, and doing it mathematically based on reality of external and internal benchmarking, because we know there have been cases where people have seen their jobs posted for much more than they make, and therefore apply to that job because they want to make that money based on that pay range posted. So that's important to again, as we mentioned, check the internal and external equity of those ranges when you post them.
Yeah, and I'll give you a plug as well. Follow Desiree on LinkedIn if you don't. She wrote a really great article on pay equity as it's related to sports and women's sports. It's fascinating. She's got a huge passion there, which comes out in the article. Her daughter is an amazing basketball and on the cutting edge of flag football. So you pick up some of that passion as well. So lots of good opportunities to learn about what we're doing at OutSolve and the things we've got going on. Anything else before we close it out, Desiree?
No, I think the main points are that you might need help in this, and it's okay, and that we are here we specialize in this in order to tackle the challenge of pay transparency. We've developed a checklist that Neil mentioned earlier that employers can use in order to stay on top of these things, because it's, like we said, changing by state, but also requires internal communication, training of managers, to support the organization in making sure when they hire people they're within the ranges that are established. Those ranges, as we mentioned, should be established with thought and care over internal and external equity. So there's a range of things that must be done, and our checklist does break those down nicely for employers to ensure that all of their I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
So pay transparency is definitely here to stay. The trend lines are there. That's the direction that everything is going to be moving in. Pay transparency equals fair pay, and that is what organizations are interested in. That's what our employees are interested in. The laws are going to continue to change, so keep up with OutSolve to make sure you know what's happening, and certainly reach out to us for any consulting that could help you in your efforts towards fair pay.